Just
Hello, everyone, and welcome back into the GSMC Dead Ball Sports Podcast. And for our third time of the day, we're going to start talking about some of these NFL Wildcard Weekend matchups here, starting off in the AFC, concluding with the Broncos-Bills matchup, the 7-2 matchup. It seemingly sounds like a better matchup on paper than I think it will end up being on the field, but I still give the Denver Broncos a lot of credit. I don't necessarily think this will be as big a blowout as people might think, but ultimately, without further ado, let me get into my ultimate thoughts on this specific game. Wrong graphic there. But ultimately, these two teams, I feel like, match up better than people even realize, and I really think that this Broncos defense can prove to be a challenge for this Bills offense. And I feel like, if the Broncos force an early turnover and get good field position through that and keep Bo Nix on schedule, I feel like there could be a path to making this game closer. I don't necessarily think it will be a winning formula on the day because I just think the Bills are that much better and a little bit more talented at this point in their championship caliber and candidacy, but I do think that this game could be a lot closer than people might realize. So without further ado, let's just jump right into it. But talking about this Broncos team in terms of the matchup, I really think that Sean Payton does an excellent job with Bo Nix in his development, and Vance Joseph is an excellent job in getting this quote-unquote no-name defense really disciplined and aggressive. I like what they're doing in terms of allowing Pat Surtain and these corners the opportunity to go mano-a-mano with a team's best receiver and locking them down. And then up front with the linebackers, Cody Barton, mind you, Zach Allen up front, a lot of these guys generating just enough pressure to really annoy opposing quarterbacks. But the Bills' offense offers them their most interesting conundrum because they don't really have a number one wide receiver. And that plays into the hands of someone like Josh Allen, who this year especially has protected the football better than anyone in the NFL. And I do think that plays into him taking what the Broncos give him. I do think that ultimately it's going to be a bit more challenging than he might even realize to be able to get his receivers on schedule and in rhythm. But I do think that that is an interesting thing to realize in the back of a guy like Pat Surtain's mind, is that, okay, this receiving core isn't necessarily just one guy who we have to try and contain. It's guys who can get open for Josh Allen whenever we need them to. And most importantly, Josh Allen can also take off and run the football. So it's not like you can key in on your man one-on-one. You're going to have to really try and determine who to pick up at what time. And so that's why I think this is an interesting offense versus defense matchup here. And that's the big question for this Broncos defense heading into this game. Can they slow down Josh Allen and allow these aggressive corners to potentially force turnovers, potentially get good field position, and ultimately allow Bo Nix to grow into this game? Because I do think we turn to the Broncos offense that there are ways that Bo Nix can stay on schedule, because I'm going to talk about one of the reasons why the Bills' defense might falter, but ultimately let's focus on Bo Nix and the Broncos' offense and how they operate. The Bills are a very zone-heavy defensive team, and so you can exploit a lot of things down low in terms of the looks you might be able to get for Bo Nix. But whether or not he's willing to take those looks is what could determine how many points the Broncos can score. Because Bo Nix has been prone to looking deeper than you would like a rookie quarterback to look downfield. And so that has led to some overthrows and mistakes and some interceptions that you can't really happen against this prolific Bills offense. And so if Bo Nix is able to take everything that's underneath and slowly move the footballs, keep on schedule, get to second and shorts, third and short situations so you're not backed up against the sticks all the time. Then you can develop a rhythm, you can control the ball a little bit more, and ultimately really strike fear into Bills fans' hearts. And so that's what I want to see from the Broncos offense, if Bo Nix can really take what's underneath rather than go for the big plays. And I think the best way to do it is ironically through their best big play threat, Marvin Mims, because he is very versatile for them. He can go on jet sweeps, he loves bubble and tunnel screens, and he's not just someone who can extend the field vertically. He can stretch you horizontally as well. So this guy is going to be a very versatile gadget piece, an X factor in this matchup offensively for the Broncos that I really, really think can make a difference for how long they can sustain drives. Because I do think that you're going to want to be aggressive a little bit in the passing game to try and keep up with Josh Allen, but it's how you do it and the intentionality you do it with that will ultimately matter for Denver and Bo Nix. But on the Bills side of things, defensively, because we know what this offense is certainly capable of. Defensively, one of the biggest concerns for the Bills is just getting off the field. They're one of the worst defenses in the entire NFL in terms of getting off the field on third down. And I do think that if I look at the stats correctly, the Denver Broncos are one of the better offenses in terms of extending drives. And I do think Bo Nix is certainly capable of making big plays even in third and long situations, because he's someone who, I do think does appreciate the mundanities of just dumping the football off. B, he's a dual threat ability guy. And C, he does trust a lot of his receivers downfield, unlike any other rookie quarterback in the NFL, outside of potentially Jaden Daniels, we'll talk about a bit later. But ultimately, I do think that the Bills' defense really is going to have to stay disciplined in their zone scheme, really try and make it as effective as possible, close and shrink the middle of the field, most importantly, because that's where Bo Nix could be able to be forced to throw the football if you lock down your outside guys in the perimeter. And so that's what I think the Bills need to do defensively. But ultimately, the Broncos have to have in mind, hey, if the Bills are a bad team in terms of forcing 3 and outs, we have a chance to sustain drives. So if you can just get into third and short, potentially say third and 8 to 9 situations, then you might have a shot here, because no matter the length, that's been the Bills' problem all year long, getting off the field. And so that's the thing that can win this football game for the Broncos and really spring an upset that shocks the world. Ball control. It's the nature of what you have to do in the NFL sometimes, especially if you're an underdog like the Broncos. Then, in terms of both of these offenses and how this game could look, I do think that it could become high scoring if both of these defenses win the day. And I do think that ultimately the defenses are what going to determine this game, whether or not the Broncos defense can force a turnover and whether or not the Bills defense will get out the field. But I do have to give respect to both of these offensive schemes, first and foremost. In terms of Sean Payton, for getting Bo Nix to mature throughout the season, developing him into a competent, potentially long-term NFL starter for Denver. And then on the other side of things, Joe Brady really making Josh Allen someone who is worthy of not just the MVP candidacy, but worthy of consideration as someone who could usurp Mahomes as the next face of the NFL, quote-unquote. It's going to take a lot of Super Bowls, but ultimately he can do it. And it's the same reason as to why Mahomes has been so prolific throughout his career. It's because he doesn't turn the ball over, and he takes what the defense gives him. And that's what makes this Bills offense a lot more special than last year's. And so that's why I think that when we look at the ways the Broncos can win, they really start to shrink, because this is a different Josh Allen. He's not someone who you know is going to throw the football downfield. He's not someone who you know has that number one receiver in the back of his mind who, when he gets to a certain part of the field, he's immediately targeting. So that's what makes this challenge, because the Broncos do have ways they can win defensively. They do have the corners and safeties to really challenge this really ragtag receiving core. But ultimately, I do feel that Josh Allen, and especially a player we haven't talked about, James Cook, have been so disciplined in terms of staying on schedule no matter what, extending drives no matter what, that I don't necessarily think it will come down to explosive plays. It will come down to what Josh Allen has done best, protecting the football for the Bills side of things. We talked about Denver trying to control the football, but ultimately the Bills just have to continue doing what they're doing in terms of not turning the football over and sustaining drives and allowing Josh Allen to do his thing. That I think that it will become a little bit too much for this Broncos team to overcome. In terms of my predictions, I do think the Broncos will keep this close for a little bit. I do think that if you get the ball first, you're going to want to establish what you're going to do offensively, show some looks like screens, show Buffalo some looks like, maybe some deep shots, but ultimately make sure that Bo Nix is prepared as soon as he gets on that football field for whatever the Bills show him in coverage. And then ultimately I think that formula will peter out by the mid-second quarter, maybe into the third. But ultimately I just think that as Buffalo grows into the game, this crowd gets behind them. We haven't even talked about the home field advantage for them. If this crowd gets behind them, they're going to start to amp up a little bit more, and ultimately by the end of the game, they'll be playing their best football, and Josh Allen will have taken over the game. So that's how I think this game will flow. The Broncos will look good early, prove that they're a solid 7th seed, a worthy opponent for the first couple of minutes, and then towards the end of the game, the Bills will take over as usual. So that's what I'm going to project. I'm going to say that it's going to be a 38-24 scoreline. I think it's going to come down to, Josh Allen just making a little bit more explosive plays, both with his legs and with his arm, than Bo Nix. And so that's my prediction. But let me know what you think in the comments. Be coming up next, we're transitioning over to the NFC, talking about the interesting Packers-Eagles rematch of that game in Brazil Week 1. It should be a good one. We talk about it right after this short break.